Hey, everybody. Welcome to week 2 of this 8-week session of Music 104. I know that this week was a little bit bumpy for some of you because there were some folks starting it midweek, and then you have to wait until you're active on Canvas and you got to get into everything. Hopefully by now everybody is set, everybody has the book, everybody's got the rhythm of things, so we can just continue to move forward. I will say I'm a little concerned right now. Now this, just so that you know, this is Sunday afternoon when I'm recording this. So as of right now, not a lot of you have done the discussion post. And so moving forward with your weeks, your initial discussion post is always due on Thursday at noon. That's the deadline. And the idea is that you get that post in so that then you have time to read other posts and you can reply to other posts, and it gives you that. It also helps set up the rhythm. So you have your, or did I say noon? I think, no, it's at the end of the day. Noon is your welcome video. So that's always noon. Now I extended it in week 1 because we had people starting late. So I went ahead and extended that to Saturday. These modules are all set up so that they're sequential, and you have to complete one for it to unlock the next one, and that is to try to get you to build a rhythm and to get you moving through the materials. So you can't really do the discussions without getting through the materials. So if your thought is, I'm going to do all of this on Sundays, it's not going to work because you need to get the welcome video, and that locks down at noon on Thursdays. And then you need to get your discussion post in by Thursday. Now that won't lock down, but it will get marked late if you post it after that. And so you could get yourself stuck. The goal is you watch that welcome video on Monday. That's the ideal goal. You're watching this video on Monday so that you can answer the question so that it'll unlock the next thing to get going. And that way I set the context for the week, you know everything that's going on, and then you move forward. Then you have each lesson, which has you're going to read the textbook, you're going to listen to the playlist, you're going to go through the pages in the module, and then you're going to take your quiz. That will unlock the next one, and then so forth. And then getting through the modules with the quizzes unlocks your assignments, because going forward, you can't really answer the discussions until you've gone through the materials. So that means you got to move through this quickly. And sometimes I'll get students that will complain, but that's what you get with an 8-week class. This is what happens, okay? So I want to help you to be able to be on top of all of that. So hopefully that all makes sense and you'll be good. Now, last week you had your orientation module. You had the module that was going back. So you learned about Stephen Foster. You learned about ragtime. You learned a bit about jazz. And you also learned in chapters 1 and 2, you learned about blues, about classic blues, Delta blues, country blues. You learned then about urban blues. You learned about Chess Records, which is really important. And for those of you that know the term indie label, an indie label means that it's an independent label. It's not connected to a major label. That's what that means. And so we're going to learn about some of these important early record labels. The big labels, RCA and folks like that, they were really geared towards established pop audiences. Sinatra and all those people where they were building it. It was a lot of white artists geared towards white folks. The independent labels, because they were small independently owned labels, they could take more risk. They could experiment more with different artists. And some of them really focused on black artists. Particularly, you learned about that with Chess Records, and you learned about Willie Dixon and his role as an A&R guy there. And then you learned about Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and the people that were connected to that. And this coming week, you're going to have 2 chapters. We're going to learn some more on the roots of rock and roll. You're going to learn about gospel roots and country roots. And the different styles in there, and you're going to learn about doo-wop as well, which is really important, and that'll lead into some of the questions, the assignment questions. So you've got to get through the assignments in order to then do a good job on those things. And then you're going to get into early rock and roll, and you're going to learn about Sam Phillips and Sun Records, which is an independent label. And Sam Phillips, he was a white guy, and he really focused. He was in Memphis, and you'll learn about his history, and you'll learn about how the artists he had. He really focused on black artists, and he always had said, if he could find a white guy that sounded black, he'd have it made, and he basically, it doesn't really sound like that to our ears, but he found that in Elvis Presley. And Elvis Presley is really the first major game changer in music. And he is, without a doubt, the single most important single artist, individual artist, solo artist in the history of rock and roll. And that is because he broke down barriers. He broke down barriers with race. He broke down barriers with music. He broke down barriers in society. And so I want you to really read about, pay attention to all of the things that he did there by doing the music of black artists to doing the music of white artists. Now, there were black artists already doing things. Remember that you learned about the blues and then urban blues and then into rhythm and blues, which combined blues foundations with dance rhythms. And so you learned about Louis Jordan, and you learned about Bo Diddley and people like that. And that leads into rock and roll. So, rhythm and blues really is just, the term rock and roll that you're going to learn about is really just a renaming of the term rhythm and blues. So you already had artists, people like Fats Domino, Chuck Berry, and Little Richard, that were doing what we call rock and roll. It was known as rhythm and blues at the time. And rhythm and blues was a term that was really, it was kind of a loaded term in that that implied it was black artists, black music. And so to some folks, it had a negative connotation. Now, it's very easy to go back and look back on the 50s and say they were all racist back then. They weren't all racist back then. Certainly society, there was more systemic race-related problems back then. In other words, it was the game was more against Black and Latino people in general. A lot has changed since then. When we talk about systemic racism now, that's a very different discussion than what it was in the 50s and in through the 60s in the civil rights movement, because a lot of changes have happened for the better. I think, unfortunately, it's a problem, like I mentioned before, of human nature, but progress has been made in that way. And so what happened with Elvis was that all of a sudden he started to break these barriers down. It's funny to listen to him because, we may not hear it, but he couldn't get a gig on the Grand Ole Opry because they thought he sounded too black. Now, we listen to it and we're like, I don't even know what they're talking about. But again, that was a long time ago, right? That was 70 years ago, 65 years ago, and a very different time. There was some frustration because Elvis became known as the king of rock and roll, and there was frustration, particularly among black artists. Particularly, Little Richard had a lot of issues. Later, he ended up realizing that he became way more famous and way more wealthy because there was a wall that he couldn't get past. Back then you had black clubs and you had white clubs, and there was segregation was a big deal. The Jim Crow laws were a big deal, and you couldn't cross that. There was black radio, there was white radio. Sometimes artists would play in clubs or in theaters, and they would do a concert with white audience, and then they would do a concert for black audiences. Sometimes they were segregated. So you would have the black audience, say, downstairs and the white audience upstairs, or vice versa. Or you would even have like a rope down the middle, and they would segregate them. And that started to break down with Elvis. Elvis was really started to tear that down, which caused a lot of problems. There was a lot of people that were not happy with what Elvis was doing because he was working to integrate people. And great music was great music, and great songs were great songs, and great artists were great artists, and it shouldn't matter at all what color they are. To us, we think, yeah, no duh, but that was not the case back then, and Elvis really started to break that down. And so also, because of Elvis's fame and popularity, he opened the doors for a lot of artists, people like Carl Perkins, Buddy Holly, Jerry Lee Lewis, the Everly Brothers. They might have not made it because of the types of music they did, but when Elvis takes these aspects of country and blues and rhythm and blues and comes up with really rockabilly, that's where it starts. And it started to just open the floodgates wide open. So his impact was really, really profound in many ways. And so you'll be asked about that this week. So it's important that you go through all the materials, the textbook and the online materials. Do not plagiarize. There are a ton of articles out there on the importance of Elvis. And it's very easy and tempting to copy and paste them. I don't mind if there's a quote or two here and there, as long as you cite the source. Standard issue. You already went through a thing on plagiarism. You saw that in there. But it's really important that you understand that. But you have everything that you need to get an A, to get full points on the materials in this class. Now, I do want to do a little show and tell. I wasn't quite prepared, so I'm going to go off camera for a second, but I'm not going to stop it and restart it and edit it because I'm lazy. Anyways. All right, I'm back. A lot of my books, you notice that I've been changing some books around. I do that just for fun. There's actually, much to the chagrin of my wife, there's 2 stacks of books here that are all like rock books. So I'm adding all these books into the reading list. If you go to the very last section in the module, there's a thing that says Shane's reading list for this class anyways. And so, because sometimes students will ask me, what books do you recommend? What do you read? And so there's a great place to go. It's not in any order. It's just as I'm pulling them off and putting them in. I don't even know how I would organize it, so it's just better to not. But you can find things in there. Anyways, time for a little show and tell. So let's talk about records, or what y'all call vinyls, except early on, they weren't vinyl. So I'm going to make this as quick as I can, but it's important to understand in the context of things. So back in the early days of recordings, late 1800s, they were mostly made on wax, either cylinders or discs. And then eventually the technology changed and they started making discs out of shellac, which actually comes from beetles, not the band, but the bug. And so you can read about that. And it was a readily available material up until World War II started to. They used it a lot then. That's another thing that's important. Don't think I've really talked a lot about yet. But as you go through this class, it's common when we take history classes that we kind of go war to war and we do these things. And I was always frustrated by that because there's so much else that goes on, right? There's great art, there's great literature, there's food, there's so many things. But it is important because wars do have such a significant impact. And so it's important that you're at least aware of a few of the wars as they relate to this class. The material that you learned about last week, there was a little bit of impact from the Civil War, certainly, and that always plays a specter, still does, and that was 1861 to 1865. World War I was 1914 to 1918, and then you have World War II, so that's right before where we are now, but it has a big impact because you're going to learn about also in this week with rock and rolls, you're going to learn about teenagers and how the role of teenagers changes. And some of that role is because some of these young people were more affluent. Their parents came back. They were able to buy homes. And they were given money, allowance, whatever to spend. And they would spend it on clothes, on music, on food. And the business world started to become aware of this. And they started marketing towards these teenagers. So there's a whole section in that, and you're going to learn about it. Up until the late 40s, and this to show you this. So this is a 78, and it means it spins at 78 RPMs See how there's a big chip out of that? I have this one, and I keep this one. This was made out of shellac, and these are so fragile. They break so easily. I've already gone through a couple in this class. They'll just shatter if they hit. They could really only hold. They could only hold one song per side, and maybe just a few minutes, and that was all that could do. So when you had records in the starting in the probably the teens or so up until the late 40s, the main one was 78s, and they were made out of shellac. So this is an actual 78. I have a few others probably in the garage somewhere, but like I said, these things they're so fragile that I just hang on to them. Now, I think I mentioned this last week, but in the late 40s, 1948, I believe to be exact, they started, as shellac became hard to find, and they started making records out of vinyl. So when y'all call them vinyls, vinyl is the material. Okay, it's just like calling a Kleenex a Kleenex. It's Kleenex is a brand. It's a tissue. Okay, so with records, what I call them because I'm old, they're called vinyl because of the material, or you call them vinyls, but that's what they're made out of. So here is a 45. 45 spins at 45 RPMs, like a 78, so it spins slower than a 78, not quite half. You could only have a few minutes on there. Most 45s, they tried to keep the songs under 3 minutes, like 2:50, 2 minutes, 50 seconds, something like that. So when you hear about an artist going in to make a record, up until you get to the mid-60s, they're always talking about a 45. And there's reasons why there's a big hole instead of a small hole, like you'll see the LP that I'm going to show you. But so you have your main song is an A-side, and then there was a B-side. And this actually is the first 45 that I bought myself. And interestingly enough, it's Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and the Comets, which you're going to learn about because it is a very significant song in the history of rock and roll, particularly its use in the film Blackboard Jungle. I found out about it because for the first year or maybe two of the TV show Happy Days in the early 70s, I think this is when I found out about it. This was the theme song. And so I love Rock Around the Clock. It's still one of my favorite songs. But this is the very first. I was like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years old, something like that when I bought it. I have a couple of others here. I have the obligatory Smoke on the Water. I have this came out in 1975. I share this just because it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of funny, and then it explains my head. So this is ZZ Top's Tush. You probably all know what a tush is. I don't know that I fully appreciated it at 10 when I bought this. Kind of is interesting. Now, ironically, very tame compared to what is coming out nowadays. If you got the young kids listening to, I don't know, Cardi B or whomever, you might get things a little bit more suggestive than just that. And then this is an LP, so a long playing record. Now, there were LPs that were classical recordings or things like Sinatra would come out with it. If you learn about In the Wee Small Hours of the Night, which was a concept record. But really what happened with an LP, which stands for long playing record, and sometimes you'll hear it referred to as a record album. And if you've heard that term, you may not have thought about it. But if you think about photos, think about a photo like a 45, and then you think about a photo album as a collection of photos. And that's what an LP is. It's a collection of songs. So as an artist, you would go in, you would record a couple singles, and once you started having hit singles, then they would come out on an LP. LPs turn at 33 1/3 RPM, revolutions per minute, and they are a collection. So this one has 5 songs. Now notice you're going to learn about Sun Records. This is Sun Records. And this one has 5 songs on side A and 6 songs on side B. This is Jerry Lee Lewis, Original Golden Hits Volume 2. And so there's 11 songs on this. Later in the early 80s, 83-ish, I think it was, maybe, is when CDs came out. So up until that time, now we have tapes. There's 8-track tapes and then cassette tapes. But really the LP was the thing that drove it. And of course, there's been a resurgence for any of you that buy vinyls. going out and scouring the record stores or buying new ones or whatever. I used to have about 1,000 of them, and I downgraded quite a bit. When I went to CD, I've managed to keep about 250 or 300 of them, just particularly because they're meaningful to me. But yeah, so you're going to learn about that, and there's a lot of material. So again, these videos are longer than I normally like, but it's because it's an 8-week class, so I've got to set the context for 2 to 3 chapters versus if I'm doing a 16-week and it's 1 most of the time or 2. But still, it's important that you watch this so that you understand the context. A lot of you you're doing a great job of reaching out to me. It's best to reach out to me in Canvas instead of email, but I'll still get it on email. And if you have questions, but go through the materials, do the work. Your welcome video is done by noon on Thursdays. I send reminders out every Thursday. So that's why I'm concerned, and then I send another reminder out Sunday mornings. So you'll get that, hey, here's what needs to be done. But that means you're going to have to work through everything sequentially. So find a rhythm, find a time that works, and I would say space it out throughout the week, however that is. Don't just be like, I'm going to do this class on Sundays. That's going to put you into a tough bind. Do a chunk of it on Monday or Tuesday. Do a chunk of it on Wednesday or Thursday. You could actually do everything that you need to do in this class and be done with it by the later part by Thursday or Friday of every day. Theoretically, maybe even sooner. Okay, of every day of every week. So I think that's it. This video is long enough. There were questions in here randomly, and so make sure that you watch the video and go through it. I've noticed that some students just try to jump to the questions, but then they end up having to go back and watch the video because the answers are in the video. And it's not necessarily things that you're going to know because I go back and add them in, and that may relate to something. You may have a question here at the end that relates to something I said back at minute 3. So that's how I know that you've watched this. All right. Have a great week. It's supposed to be raining today. Now, mind you, it's sunny outside and beautiful because I'm recording this on Sunday, but you'll get this on Monday. So stay warm, stay dry, stay safe, and have a great week. It ends with Halloween week, or Halloween, so, enjoy. Talk to you soon. Bye.